Hello, my dear friends. You are standing in a moonlit palace garden in ancient India, the air thick and sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and cool, creamy sandalwood. A gentle breeze carries the murmur of a distant sitar, and you watch elegant figures in fine, almost transparent muslin cloth drift between marble fountains, their dark eyes lined with kohl, their laughter like tiny bells. This is the Gupta Empire, the so-called Golden Age of India, a world of poetry, mathematics, and unimaginable luxury. It's an intoxicating vision of the past, so perfect and serene. And I have to be honest with you, if you were actually dropped into this scene, your modern sensibilities would probably not survive the first 24 hours. The reality behind the perfumed air is something our sanitized world has completely forgotten. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support makes these journeys into the forgotten corners of history possible. Now, settle back. Imagine yourself wrapped in a soft blanket, the world outside fading away. Let the image of that perfect, moonlit garden fill your mind. We are about to pull back the silken curtain and see what lies just beyond the palace walls, in the shadows of that golden age. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your focus is on a single figure, a courtier moving with practiced grace through the pillared halls of the imperial palace at Pataliputra. He is a living embodiment of the Gupta ideal. His dhoti is made of the finest cotton, so sheer it seems woven from moonlight itself. Gold adorns his ears, his neck, and his arms, catching the flickering light of 100 oil lamps. But it is not the gleam of gold or the fineness of his clothes that truly announces his status. It is his scent. He moves within a personal cloud of fragrance, a complex and costly perfume that precedes him and lingers long after he has passed. This is not a simple splash of something from a bottle. This is art. This is science. This is a declaration of power. You can almost smell it now, the deep, woody base of sandalwood paste, known as chandana, cooling and sacred, smeared artfully on his forehead and chest. Woven through it is the sharp, clean scent of camphor, the rich, animalic warmth of musk deer pods, and the impossibly precious aroma of saffron threads, worth more than their weight in the gold he wears. His clothes have been fumigated with the smoke of burning agar wood, a resinous, intoxicating scent that clings to every fibre. This is the glamorous illusion, the carefully constructed facade of a civilization that has mastered not just the arts and sciences, but the very air its elite breathe. This man is not just wearing perfume, he is wearing his refinement, his education, his proximity to the divine king. In a world of rigid social hierarchy, his fragrance is a shield, a uniform, and a weapon, ensuring that everyone who comes near him knows exactly who and what is. He is pure, sophisticated, and utterly detached from the grime of the common world. But let's follow him for a moment. Let's trail him as he concludes his duties for the evening and leaves the rarefied air of the palace. He steps from the polished marble of the royal compound onto the main thoroughfare of the capital city. And it is here, in an instant, that the beautiful illusion shatters. The fragrant bubble around him is suddenly war. You feel it in your own senses, a jarring, nauseating clash. The sublime scent of sandalwood and jasmine is fighting a desperate, losing battle against a far more powerful and pervasive smell, the raw, inescapable stench of life. This is the shocking reality. The grand city of Pataliputra, for all its wealth and monumental architecture, has no underground sewage system. There are no sanitary sewers, no water treatment plants. The narrow, unpaved streets are choked with the accumulated filth of hundreds of thousands of people and their animals. You step carefully, your eyes adjusting to the gloom outside the palace's glow. You see that the open gutters running alongside the packed earth roads are not for rainwater. They are sluggishly moving channels of human waste, kitchen refuse, and discarded junk. The air is thick with the ammonia tang of urine, the acrid smell of animal dung from the countless cows, oxen, and elephants that share these streets, and the low, sweet, cloying odor of rot. Every so often, a door will open and a servant will unceremoniously hurl a pot of household waste into the street, adding another layer to the squelching mire underfoot. The courtier you are following picks his way through the mess with a practiced, almost dancer-like elegance, his perfumed handkerchief held close to his nose. His fragrant cloud is no longer a symbol of luxury. It is a necessary tool of survival, a desperate attempt to carve out a small pocket of breathable air in an atmosphere that is, to your modern nose, an overwhelming assault. The beautiful perfume is not an accessory. It is a gas mask, The shimmering silks are not just for show, they must be washed and perfumated constantly to keep the city's true smell from clinging to them permanently. This is the forgotten truth of the Golden Age. It may have been golden for the poets and princes in their perfumed palaces, but the streets they ruled over stank to high heaven. So why? Why would a civilization that could calculate the movement of the planets and write some of the most beautiful poetry known to man live this way? The answer lies in a completely different worldview, one that separated the idea of personal purity from public sanitation. For the Gupta elite, cleanliness was a spiritual and ritual concept, not a matter of civic engineering. A high-caste individual's duty was to keep their own body and immediate surroundings pure. This was achieved through rigorous daily bathing rituals, the application of clean, perfumed pastes, and the wearing of fresh clothes. The state of the street outside was irrelevant to one's personal, spiritual purity. In fact, dealing with that filth was the designated role of the lowest castes, the chandalas or untouchables. This social structure created a profound psychological disconnect. The courtier could walk through the filth and feel no contradiction, because in his mind that filth was the responsibility of an entirely different class of human beings. It was part of the natural, divine order of things. His job was to remain ritually pure in spite of the world around him, not to change that world. His perfume wasn't meant to make the city smell better. It was meant to insulate him from the city's reality, to create a fragrant barrier that reinforced his superior status. The city's stench was a constant reminder of the chaos and impurity of the material world, while his personal fragrance was a testament to his spiritual and social elevation above it. The Golden Age, then, was not so much a physical reality as it was a state of mind, an ideology of perfection that one wore like a perfume, a gilded shield against the messy, smelly, and very human world just outside the door. This obsession with creating an image of perfection, of making something that appeared flawless and divine, was not limited to the air they breathed. It was hammered into the very metal of the empire. That desire to hammer reality into a more perfect form wasn't just a personal affectation, it was a state project, an imperial declaration. And its greatest surviving testament is not a poem or a building, but a simple, stark column of metal. Let your mind drift south now, from the sprawling city of Pataliputra to a dusty courtyard in what is now Delhi. There, standing sentinel for over 16 centuries, is a marvel that has baffled scientists and historians for generations, the Iron Pillar of Delhi. You see it before you now, rising over 23 feet from its stone platform, a single, dark shaft of iron against the sky. It looks impossibly modern, clean, and severe. Run your hand along its surface in your mind. It's not rough and pitted with rust like any other piece of ancient iron you've ever seen. It's smooth, almost silky, cool to the touch. For 1,600 years it has stood here, enduring the monsoons, the blistering heat, the choking pollution of a growing metropolis, and yet it refuses to corrode. It is an enigma, a metallurgical miracle. This is the glamorous illusion, solidified. The pillar is presented as a piece of lost, high technology, a symbol of the Gupta's almost magical scientific prowess. It's easy to imagine its creators as serene scientists in clean workshops, calmly unlocking the secrets of the elements. It feels pure, perfect, and untouchably a message from a truly golden age, proclaiming a mastery over nature that we still struggle to comprehend. The pillar doesn't just represent the Gupta Empire. It represents an ideal of flawless, effortless genius. But this, too, is a carefully constructed myth. The pillar's perfection is an illusion that hides a brutal, fiery, and deeply imperfect birth. To understand its secret, you must leave this quiet courtyard and travel back with me to the moment of its creation. We are no longer in a serene place of contemplation. We are in a scene that looks more like hell than a laboratory. Imagine a vast, open-air workshop, glowing red against the night sky. The air is not cool and still. It is thick with smoke and shimmering with heat that warps the very air you breathe. The silence is replaced by a deafening, rhythmic pandemonium, the roar of a dozen hand-pumped bellows forcing air into charcoal pits, and the ceaseless, percussive clang-clang-clang of heavy hammers on hot metal. This is the shocking reality. The pillar was not cast as one single, pure piece in a giant mould. The Gupta artisans, for all their genius, lacked the technology to build a furnace capable of reaching the melting point of iron, let alone casting a 7-ton ingot. Instead, they used a grueling process called forge welding. You see them now, dozens of sweating men, their muscles gleaming in the firelight, their bodies protected from the heat only by loincloths. They are not serene scientists, they are blacksmiths, engaged in a battle of sweat and brute force. They heat small, spunny lumps of raw iron, called blooms, in charcoal fires until they glow white-hot. Then, with a frantic, coordinated effort, they drag a bloom from the fire and hammer it ferociously, not just to shape it, but to beat out the impurities, the slag. Then, while it's still glowing, they hammer it onto another piece, and another, and another. The pillar grew incrementally, piece by painful piece, each one welded to the last by nothing more than heat and relentless, hammering force. If you could look closely at the pillar's surface today, you would see the faint lines of these ancient welds, the ghost of every hammer blow, a map of the sheer human effort that went into it. It is not a single, perfect thing. It is a composite, a mosaic of 1,000 small, imperfect pieces, beaten into the shape of perfection by hand. So why has it resisted rust? Why did this seemingly crude method create an object of such incredible longevity? The answer is not a lost secret, but a happy accident of geology and technique. The iron ore used by the Gupta smiths happened to be unusually high in phosphorus. During the smelting process, this phosphorus became part of the iron itself. But crucially, because they couldn't get their fires hot enough to melt the iron completely, they weren't able to remove all the glassy impurities from the ore. When they hammered the blooms, they didn't get all the slag out. Instead, they beat it into microscopic layers within the iron and across its surface. This is the key. The combination of high phosphorus content and the embedded slag created an invisible shield. When exposed to the elements, a complex chemical reaction occurs, forming a thin, stable, waterproof layer of a compound called iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate. This film, a mere fraction of a millimeter thick, seals the iron from the air and moisture, preventing the deep, destructive rust you see on modern iron. The smiths weren't trying to create a rust-proof pillar. They were just trying to build a massive, impressive monument for their king, Chandragupta II, using the materials and methods they had. Their imperfect technique, born of technological limitation, is the very reason for the pillar's miraculous preservation. Its flaw is its genius. The illusion is one of effortless perfection, but the reality is one of pragmatic, back-breaking labor and a fortunate chemical quirk. It was a physical symbol of power, built to awe and intimidate. But the empire's most powerful and lasting inventions were not always so solid and visible. Some were entirely abstract, yet they were born from an environment just as chaotic, noisy, and overwhelming as that ancient forge. The empire's intellectual achievements are often imagined in a similar way to the pillar, born in quiet, contemplative spaces. Picture the scene that comes to mind when you think of a great mathematical breakthrough. You probably imagine a quiet study, a library filled with scrolls, a lone genius staring at a chalkboard, lost in abstract thought. The creation of zero, the invention of the decimal system, these feel like they must have happened in a place of serene, scholarly order. We imagine the great Gupta mathematicians like Aryabhata or Brahmagupta as cloistered academics, divorced from the messiness of daily life, their minds communing with the pristine logic of the cosmos. This is the glamorous illusion that these world-changing concepts were discovered in an ivory tower, a pure intellectual pursuit. But now, let's leave the imaginary quiet study and find out where these ideas were really forged. We are plunging back into the heart of a Gupta city. But this time we're not in the perfumed palace or the fiery smithy. We are in the chaotic, overwhelming, sensory explosion of a central marketplace, a bazaar. The air is a thick soup of smells, pyramids of fragrant spices, turmeric, cumin, and cloves mingling with the scent of raw meat, fragrant flowers for temple offerings, and the dust kicked up by 1,000 shuffling feet. The sound is a constant, churning roar, merchants shouting their prices, money changers clinking coins, children crying, temple bells ringing, and the lowing of oxen pulling overloaded carts. This is not a place of quiet contemplation. It is a place of frantic, constant, and very practical calculation. This is the shocking reality. The revolutionary concepts of zero and the decimal place value system were not born in a vacuum. They were born out of necessity, right here in the chaos of commerce. You see a grain merchant trying to calculate his inventory. He doesn't have an abacus. He's drawing columns in the dirt with a stick. He has a column for ones, a column for tens, a column for hundreds. It's a system they've been using for a while, a precursor to what we know now. But what happens when he sells all the grain in his tens basket? He needs a way to show that the tens column is now empty, but that the other columns are not. He can't just leave it blank. That would be confusing and lead to errors. So he draws a circle, a dot. He calls it shunya, meaning empty or void. It is not yet a number with its own value. It is a placeholder, a practical tool, to prevent him from getting cheated. It is a symbol for nothing, born from the very real need to account for something. You watch a textile merchant haggling with a customer from Persia. They are dealing with large quantities of silk, and the numbers are getting big. The old system of unique symbols for 10, 20, 100, 1,000 is clunky and inefficient. It requires memorizing dozens of different signs. But here, in the dirt, the grain merchant's system is faster. With just 10 simple symbols and through 9, plus that new little circle, they can represent any number imaginable, just by changing the position of the symbols. A 2 in the first column is just 2. But a 2 in the second column, followed by a shania, is 20. A 2 in the third column, followed by 2 shanias, is 200. It's elegant, efficient, and revolutionary. And it wasn't invented by a philosopher pondering the nature of nothingness. It was developed by accountants, merchants, and tax collectors who needed a better, faster way to do their jobs in the noisy, confusing, and high-stakes environment of the market. The decimal system wasn't a top-down innovation from the universities. It was a bottom-up solution from the streets. So why did this system, born of such worldly concerns, become the foundation of higher mathematics and science? The logic lies in the seamless connection between the practical and the philosophical in the Indian worldview. The concept of Shunye void, the nothingness, was already a deeply powerful idea in Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. It represented the ultimate reality, the state of non-being from which all being emerges. So when the mathematicians and astronomers at universities like Nalanda saw this practical little circle being used by the merchants, it resonated deeply. They didn't see it as a crude tool of the marketplace. They saw the philosophical truth of Shunya given practical form. They took this marketplace invention and elevated it. They are the ones who began to explore Shunya, or zero, not just as a placeholder, but as a number in its own right. What happens when you add 0 to a number? Nothing. What happens when you subtract it? Nothing. What happens when you multiply by it? Everything becomes 0. What happens when you divide by it? This question would perplex them and lead to centuries of mathematical and philosophical debate. The genius of the Gupta age was not in separating the sacred from the profane, or the intellectual from the commercial. It was in seeing the connection between them. They could see the cosmic void in a merchant's empty grain basket. They took a tool designed for counting money and turned it into a key for unlocking the secrets of the universe. This same fusion of high-minded theory and messy, hands-on practice was happening in another, far more visceral field, where the stakes were not profit and loss, but life and death. From the abstract world of numbers, let's turn to the most intimate and physical science of all, medicine. When you think of ancient surgery, you might conjure a grim image of a battlefield amputation or a barber surgeon in a grimy medieval shop, but the Gupta Empire offers a much more refined and impressive vision. Let's imagine the clinic of a master surgeon, a follower of the legendary Sushruta, whose texts formed the basis of Indian medicine. The room is clean, orderly, and filled with a dazzling array of specialized instruments. You see scalpels, forceps, needles, catheters, and speculums, all meticulously crafted from high-quality metal and laid out on a clean cloth. The surgeon himself is a figure of immense dignity and knowledge, a priest-like physician who chants mantras to calm his patient and invokes the gods of healing. This is the glamorous illusion. A vision of advanced, almost modern-looking surgery, a golden age of medicine where doctors performed complex procedures like rhinoplasty, cataract removal, and even plastic surgery with skill and precision. The image is one of control, knowledge, and an almost sacred cleanliness. It feels safe, professional, and far removed from the butchery we associate with ancient medicine. Now, let's peel back the silken cloth and look closer at what is actually happening in this room. Let's focus on one of Sushruta's most famous procedures, the reconstruction of a nose, often for a person who has had it cut off as a punishment for a crime like adultery. The patient is sitting on a low stool. He is not comfortably unconscious on an operating table. He is wide awake. He has been given a large amount of wine to drink, which serves as a crude sedative and analgesic, but he is conscious and terrified. The surgeon begins by measuring the area of the missing nose with a leaf. He then takes a sharp scalpel of those beautiful instruments you admired and, without any further anesthetic, he slices a flap of living skin and flesh from the patient's forehead or cheek. This is the shocking reality. You can hear the patient's muffled scream. You can smell the metallic tang of fresh blood mingling with the incense burning in the corner. The surgeon, with practiced speed, then rotates this flap of flesh downwards, keeping it attached by a small pedicle to maintain blood supply. He expertly shapes it into a new nose, stitching it into place with fine needles and horsehair thread. He inserts two small wooden tubes into the nostrils to keep them open as it heals. The entire procedure is a blur of controlled, precise violence. The floor is not pristine, it is slick with blood. The patient is not serene, he is in agony, held down by several strong assistants. The surgeon's hands, while steady, are not sterile. He has washed them, yes, but the very concept of microscopic germs is more than 1,000 years away. He is operating in a world that is, by our standards, teeming with invisible pathogens. The risk of infection is astronomical. Many would survive the knife, only to die days later from a raging fever. The beautiful, gilded scalpels were wielded in a world of unimaginable pain and invisible, deadly danger. So why would anyone submit to this? And how could a medical system be so advanced in its surgical mechanics and so utterly primitive in its understanding of pain and infection? The answer lies in the Indian worldview that deeply intertwined the physical body with karma and spiritual destiny. Pain was not seen as something to be completely eliminated, but as an inevitable part of life and the healing process. The surgeon's skill was not just in his hands, but in his mind, his ability to remain calm and focused amidst the chaos and suffering, to be a steady channel for divine healing energy. The mantras he chanted were not just for show, they were considered an essential part of the procedure, a form of spiritual anesthetic that helped both surgeon and patient endure the ordeal. Furthermore, the concept of disease and healing was based on the balance of three bodily humours or doshas, wind vata, bile pitta and phlegm kapha. Sickness was a result of an imbalance, and surgery was a physical intervention to restore that balance. Infection, in their view, would be seen not as an invasion of external microbes, but as the body's own humours falling out of balance due to the trauma of the operation. Their antiseptics, things like fumigating the room with certain resins, or applying specific herbs and clarified butter ghee to the wound, were aimed at pacifying the doshas, not killing germs. In a strange way, their theory worked just well enough to make surgery possible. Some of the herbs they used did have mild antiseptic properties. The sheer speed of the surgeons minimized trauma, and the human body's own resilience did the rest. They were performing miracles of mechanics, while completely misunderstanding the underlying biology. They were rebuilding faces, restoring sight, and saving lives through a combination of brilliant technique, profound faith, and a tolerance for suffering that is almost unimaginable to us today. This ability to create a thing of beauty and utility, like a new nose or a fine piece of silk, while masking the harsh and painful reality of its creation, was a hallmark of the age. That contrast between the beautiful finished product and the grim reality of its creation is woven into the very fabric of the Gupta Empire. Let's leave the intense, bloody theatre of the surgeon's clinic and turn our attention to one of the most celebrated products of the age, its luxurious textiles. Imagine a royal procession. The emperor sits atop a magnificent elephant, shaded by a canopy of shimmering silk. The courtiers and nobles who follow are a river of colour, dressed in cotton so fine it's called woven air, dyed in vibrant shades of indigo, madder red and saffron yellow. These fabrics are the empire's greatest export, coveted from Rome to China. They are symbols of wealth, sophistication, and the incredible craftsmanship of Gupta artisans. This is the glamorous illusion. A world draped in ethereal beauty, a testament to a peaceful, prosperous society with a mastery of the loom. The silks and cottons feel light, effortless, almost magical in their perfection. Now, let's follow one of these bolts of woven air back to its source. We are not in a clean, well-lit workshop. We are in a cramped, dark, and deafeningly loud weaving shed in a dusty village. The air is thick with cotton dust and the sharp, chemical smell of dye vats. The floor is packed earth, and the only light comes from the open doorway. Here, you see the weavers, their bodies contorted for hours on end at large pit looms, their feet working the pedals in a cavity dug into the ground. Their hands fly with incredible speed, passing the shuttle back and forth, the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the loom a constant, mind-numbing soundtrack to their lives. This is the shocking reality. Look closer at the hands that create such beauty. The weavers' fingers are calloused and stained, their nails worn down. But it's not just the weavers. Over in a corner, you see the children. Small children, some no older than 5 or 6, are hunched over their own tasks. Their nimble fingers are perfect for the painstaking work of spinning the raw cotton into incredibly fine thread, a thread so delicate it would snap in less experienced hands. Other children are tasked with carding the cotton, combing it between 2 bristled pads to align the fibres, a process that fills the air with a constant, lung-choking dust. In the dye works next door, you see more children and women stirring steaming vats of indigo or madder. Their hands and arms are permanently stained blue or red. The mordants used to fix the dye chemicals like alum and acidic fruit juices are harsh, leaving their skin cracked and sore. There are no child labor laws here. There are no weekends. There is only the relentless demand for more cloth, driven by the insatiable appetite of the elite and the lucrative trade routes. The woven air that feels so light and effortless on the back of a noblewoman is born from the heavy, ceaseless, and often painful labor of the poor, including its youngest members. So why was this considered acceptable? How could a society that produced sublime poetry and philosophy be built on the strained backs and tiny hands of children? The logic is rooted, once again, in the rigid caste and family structure of the time. Craft skills were not taught in schools, they were passed down from generation to generation within a specific caste or subcaste jati. A weaver's son would become a weaver. A dyer's daughter would learn the family trade. It was seen as the natural order of things, a fulfillment of one's dharma or sacred duty. A child learning the family craft from a young age was not seen as exploitation, but as education, an essential apprenticeship for their preordained role in society. The family was the fundamental economic unit. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, had to contribute to its survival. The child's labor was not a separate job, it was part of their contribution to the household, as essential as their mother's cooking or their father's weaving. The concept of a childhood dedicated to play and abstract learning, separate from the world of work, simply did not exist for the vast majority of the population. The nobles and courtiers who wore these fine textiles were likely completely disconnected from the reality of their production. They would admire the fineness of the thread, the evenness of the weave, the vibrancy of the color, and see it as a testament to the skill of the artisan caste, a skill they believed was innate and divinely ordained. They would not see the tired eyes, the aching backs, or the small, stained hands that made it all possible. The beauty of the final product effectively sanitized its origin, allowing one part of society to experience a golden age by quite literally weaving the toil of another part of society into its very fabric. This quest for perfection, for an idealized product that hides its messy origins, extended even to the pursuit of something as fundamental as life itself. From the tangible quest for perfect cloth, let's venture into a more abstract and dangerous pursuit, the quest for perfect health and eternal life. In the courts of the Gupta kings and among the wealthy elite, a fascinating and secretive science flourished alongside medicine and mathematics. This was the science of Rasayana, a form of Indian alchemy. Imagine a revered alchemist in his laboratory. It's a place of mystery and wonder, filled with strange glass retorts, bubbling potions and furnaces glowing with controlled heat. He is a master of esoteric knowledge, poring over ancient texts written on palm leaves, his goal nothing less than the conquest of aging and death. He seeks to create elixirs of immortality, tonics that will restore youth and powders that will grant superhuman strength. This is the glamorous illusion, the alchemist as a wise sage, a pioneer of chemistry, unlocking the secrets of nature to elevate humanity. His work seems noble, mystical, and profoundly powerful. He is not just mixing chemicals, he is transmuting the very essence of life. Now, let's look more closely at the ingredients on his workbench. Beside the rare herbs and sacred waters, you see bowls filled with shimmering, heavy powders and liquids. There is the bright red of cinnabar, the dull grey of lead, and the silvery gleam of mercury. The alchemist, following the complex recipes in his texts, carefully prepares these substances. He grinds the cinnabar into a fine powder. He heats the mercury in a crucible, watching as it turns into a vapor and then reforms, a process he believes purifies it, making it medicinal. He combines these potent minerals with honey and clarified butter, chanting specific mantras with each step to imbue the mixture with spiritual power. He then offers this concoction to a wealthy patron, a king or a merchant desperate to cheat time. This is the shocking reality. The alchemist's elixirs of long life were, in fact, often slow-acting poisons. Cinnabar is mercury sulfide, a highly toxic substance. The processed mercury, which they called rasa or parad, was the cornerstone of their practice, believed to be the essence of the god Shiva himself. But no matter how many times they purified it through heating and mixing, it remained what it is, a neurotoxin. The wealthy patrons who consumed these alchemical preparations in the hope of living forever were, in fact, slowly poisoning themselves with heavy metals. The initial effects might have seemed promising. Small doses of mercury can sometimes have a temporary stimulating or euphoric effect. But over time, the poison would accumulate in their bodies, leading to tremors, memory loss, kidney failure, and madness. The very elixirs they believed were preserving their youth were insidiously destroying their minds and bodies from the inside out. The quest for immortality was, for many, a direct path to an early and agonizing death. What was the logic behind this deadly mistake? How could they believe so strongly that these poisons were panaceas? The answer lies in a philosophical and metallurgical worldview. For the Gupta alchemist, the universe was not made of atoms and elements as we know them. It was a play of cosmic forces and essences. Metals were not just inert substances, they were believed to be living, growing things, maturing in the womb of the earth. Base metals like lead were seen as unripe or sick gold. The goal of alchemy was to speed up this natural process of maturation, to heal the sick metals and transform them into perfect, immortal gold. They believed this same principle applied to the human body. The body, like a base metal, was imperfect and subject to decay. By consuming the purified essence of powerful minerals, especially mercury, Shiva's essence, and sulfur, the essence of the goddess Shakti, they believed they could transmute the body's tissues, making them stronger, purer, and more resilient, more like immortal gold. The poisoning symptoms were often misinterpreted. The tremors could be seen as the body vibrating with new energy. The mental confusion could be interpreted as a sign of spiritual transcendence, the mind detaching from the mundane world. It was a system of belief so powerful that it could rationalize away the clear evidence of its own toxicity. The glamorous illusion of eternal youth was so seductive that its adherents were willing to overlook the dark, neurological decay that was the true result of their quest. This fascination with strategy, with perfecting a system and achieving victory, was not confined to the laboratory. It was also being played out on a much smaller, more symbolic battlefield. From the alchemist's dangerous game with life and death, we move to another, more cerebral game, but one that is no less a product of its time. Picture a serene scene in a palace courtyard. Two princes, young and intelligent, are seated on plush cushions before a low, inlaid table. Between them is a board of 64 squares, intricately carved from ivory and ebony. On the board are elegant, stylized figures: a king, his minister, elephants, horses, chariots, and foot soldiers. The princes are engaged in a game of intense concentration, a silent battle of wits. This is the birthplace of chess, known in the Gupta period as chaturanga, meaning 4 divisions of the military. This is the glamorous illusion: chess as a noble, intellectual pastime, a game for kings and scholars, a testament to the Gupta Empire's sophisticated and strategic mindset. It seems like a pure exercise in logic, a beautiful abstraction of conflict far removed from the grit and blood of a real war. Now, let's listen closer to the tutor who is instructing the princes. He is not just teaching them rules of movement. He is teaching them the grim calculus of power. The foot soldier, he explains, gesturing to one of the small pawns, is of little value. Do not hesitate to sacrifice him to save a more important piece. His purpose is to die for the king. He points to the elephant, the precursor, to our bishop, and the horse, the knight. These are your instruments of power, but they too are expendable if it serves the ultimate goal, the protection of the Raja, the king. The game, you realize, is a direct and brutal simulation of the Gupta military and social hierarchy. This is the shocking reality. Chaturanga was not invented as a leisurely pastime. It was a war game, a strategic training tool designed to instill in young princes the ruthless mindset required to rule. The board of 64 squares, the Ashtapada, was a stylized battlefield. Each piece was a direct representation of a real military unit. The pawns, the foot soldiers, were the low-caste levies, considered numerous and disposable, thrown into the front lines to absorb the initial assault. The elephants, horses, and chariots, which would later evolve into the rook, were the professional, more valuable arms of the military, the aristocratic warrior class. The minister, or mantri, the precursor to the queen, was the king's most powerful advisor, and the king, the Raja, was the center of the universe, simultaneously the most powerful and the most vulnerable piece on the board. The game's objective, to trap and immobilize the enemy king Sharmat, the king is frozen, which became checkmate, was a direct reflection of ancient Indian warfare, where capturing the enemy leader often caused the entire army to collapse. The game was a cold, hard lesson in the expendability of human life for the sake of the state. The princes weren't just playing, they were rehearsing the bloody sacrifices they would one day have to make with real men on real battlefields. So why create such a stark and brutal teaching tool and frame it as a noble game? The logic lies in the concept of Rajadharma, the sacred duty of the king. The king's primary duty was not to be compassionate or kind in the modern sense. It was to maintain order, protect the kingdom, and expand its power by any means necessary. Chaturanga was a way to teach this ruthless pragmatism in a controlled environment. It divorced the act of sacrifice from the messy, emotional reality of it. On the chessboard, sacrificing a pawn is a logical, unemotional decision. This trained the future ruler to think of his real soldiers in the same way, not as individual men with families and lives, but as strategic assets, pieces to be moved, sacrificed, and lost in the pursuit of victory. The game reinforced the caste system in a powerful, subliminal way. The pawn could only move forward, one slow step at a time, reflecting the lack of social mobility for the lower classes. It could never become a horse or an elephant. Its only hope for glory was to reach the other side of the board, where it could be promoted, a rare event, just like a common soldier rising to high command. The game was a microcosm of the Gupta worldview, a universe governed by a rigid hierarchy, where individual worth was defined by one's position at birth and where the concept of the greater good was a justification for the calculated sacrifice of the weak. The refined, intellectual surface of the game was the perfect vehicle for its core lesson of brutal, political necessity. This method of packaging complex, sometimes uncomfortable knowledge into a refined and idealized form was the entire purpose of the empire's greatest educational institution. From the symbolic battlefield of the chessboard, let us travel to the intellectual heart of the Gupta Empire, a place where knowledge itself was the ultimate prize. We arrive at the great Mahavihara of Nalanda, the most famous university of the ancient world. Before you rises a stunning architectural complex of soaring stupas, ornate temples and multi-storied residential colleges, all set amidst serene lakes and mango groves. Thousands of scholars and students from across Asia are here, their saffron and maroon robes a splash of color against the red brick walls. They are debating philosophy, studying medicine, composing poetry and exploring the mysteries of the cosmos. This is the glamorous illusion of Nalanda, a fortress of knowledge, a beacon of learning that shone for centuries, a place where the world's wisdom was gathered, preserved, and disseminated. It feels permanent, eternal, a library of humanity's greatest thoughts carved in stone. But now, let's follow a monk into one of those famed libraries. The building is magnificent, with a towering, 9-story structure named Ratnadai, the ocean of jewels. Inside, however, you notice something unsettling. There are no printing presses, no sturdy, bound books. The books are manuscripts, painstakingly copied by hand onto the most common writing material of the age, palm leaves. You see a scribe at work, his hand moving with incredible slowness and precision. He is not writing with pen and ink, which would run on the leaf's surface. He is etching, scratching the letters into the dried leaf with a sharp metal stylus. Then, he rubs a mixture of soot and oil over the surface, which fills in the etched grooves, making the letters visible. He works in near silence, the only sound the faint, dry scratch of the stylus on the leaf. This is the shocking reality. The entire, vast repository of knowledge at Nalanda Ocean of Jewels was breathtakingly fragile. The palm leaf manuscripts were incredibly vulnerable. In the hot, humid climate of eastern India, they were a constant feast for termites, bookworms, and mold. A single stray spark from an oil lamp could send a century of scholarship up in smoke. A monsoon flood could turn a library of priceless texts into a pile of rotting mulch. The preservation of knowledge was not a passive act of storage. It was a constant, desperate, losing battle against decay. Every single text existed in only a handful of hand-scratched copies. If those few copies were lost, the knowledge they contained, a unique philosophical treatise, a medical text, a book of astronomical calculations, could be extinguished from the world forever. The great fortress of knowledge was, in reality, as delicate as a dried leaf. Its seeming permanence was an illusion maintained by the frantic, continuous labor of the scribes, who were in a constant race against disintegration. So why rely on such a fragile medium for such precious information? Why didn't this golden age of invention produce a more durable form of preserving its own wisdom? The answer lies in a combination of material availability and a philosophical outlook on the nature of knowledge itself. Palm trees were abundant and cheap, the perfect raw material for a large-scale knowledge industry. Preparing the leaves was a simple, established craft. More durable materials like vellum, made from animal skin, were not widely used, partly due to the influence of Buddhist and Jain principles of ahimsa, or non-violence towards living beings. Writing on metal plates was done, but it was expensive and reserved for important royal decrees or land grants, not for lengthy philosophical texts. But there's a deeper, more philosophical reason. In the oral tradition that dominated Indian learning for centuries, the written word was often seen as secondary, a mere memory aid. The true location of knowledge was not on the page. It was in the mind of a master who had memorized the text. The goal of a student was not just to read a text, but to learn it by heart, to internalize it completely. From this perspective, the physical manuscript was just a temporary vessel. Its decay was a natural part of the cycle of existence. This created a profound urgency to transmit knowledge from teacher to student to ensure it lived on in a human mind, which was seen as a more secure repository than a fragile leaf. The library at Nalanda was not just a collection of objects, it was a living ecosystem of minds. The scribes weren't just copying books, they were fighting to keep ideas alive, one scratch at a time, knowing that nature and time were their constant enemies. The knowledge they so carefully preserved was not always noble or philosophical. Some of it was intensely practical and designed to operate in the shadows, far from the light of the university. While the monks of Nalanda were busy preserving the high-minded knowledge of the past, the Gupta state was perfecting a different, more worldly kind of knowledge. This was the art of espionage, the quiet collection of information that held the empire together. Let's imagine the empire through the eyes of its rulers. We see a vast, peaceful kingdom, administered with justice and wisdom. The roads are safe for travelers and merchants, taxes are fair, and the people are happy and loyal to their benevolent king. This image of stability and order is famously recorded by the Chinese pilgrim faction, who travelled through the empire during the reign of Chandragupta and described a realm with little crime and no need for harsh punishments. This is the glamorous illusion, the Gupta Empire as a utopia of good governance, a golden age of peace and security, held together by the people's respect for their enlightened rulers. Now, let's slip into the shadows of this peaceful kingdom. Let's follow a seemingly ordinary person, a wandering ascetic, a courtesan in a high-class brothel, a merchant travelling with a caravan, or even a poison damsel, a Vishakanya, a young woman raised on a careful diet of poison until her very touch becomes lethal. These are not ordinary citizens. They are the eyes and ears of the state, the agents of a sophisticated and far-reaching intelligence network described in ancient texts on statecraft like the Arthashastra, a manual whose principles were still very much alive. You are in a bustling tavern. Two men are complaining about a new tax. The friendly woman who serves them more wine, laughing at their jokes, is memorizing their faces and every word they say. On a road outside the city, a group of merchants discusses a planned smuggling operation. The quiet sadhu, the holy man meditating under a nearby tree, is not lost in contemplation of the divine. He is listening intently, his mind a silent recorder. This is the shocking reality. The peace and order of the Gupta Empire were not maintained simply by the people's goodwill. They were actively enforced by a pervasive and morally ambiguous system of espionage. The state employed a vast network of spies drawn from every level of society. These agents were trained to be masters of disguise and deception. They monitored public opinion, reported dissent, and watched for signs of corruption among officials. They used seduction, bribery, and manipulation to extract information. They would foment discord among the king's enemies, turning them against each other. The Vishakanya, that ultimate human weapon, was a real and feared tool of assassination, an emblem of a system that valued the security of the state above any individual's life or moral code. The peaceful kingdom described by faction was, in fact, a carefully monitored and controlled society, where any citizen could be an informant and any conversation could be a report to the king. The lack of crime was not necessarily a sign of a virtuous populace, but perhaps a sign of a populace that was afraid to step out of line. So why was such a duplicitous system considered a necessary and even virtuous part of governance? The logic is laid bare in the Arthashastra itself. The text, attributed to the cunning advisor Chanakya, is brutally pragmatic. It argues that for a kingdom to survive and prosper, the king must be all-knowing. He must know what his ministers, his subjects, and his enemies are thinking and planning. Secrecy and surveillance are not evils, they are essential tools of Rajadharma, the king's duty to maintain order. The text posits that human nature is inherently fickle and prone to corruption. Left unwatched, officials will steal, subjects will rebel, and enemies will conspire. Therefore, the good king must use spies. This was not seen as a violation of privacy, a concept that had little meaning in a society where the collective good, as embodied by the king, trumped individual rights. The spy network was considered the king's extended sensory apparatus, allowing him to see and hear everything within his realm. The use of deception and assassination against enemies of the state was not considered murder. It was seen as a surgical strike, a necessary evil to prevent the greater evil of war or rebellion. The illusion of a serene and willing populace was a masterpiece of political stagecraft, a beautiful facade built upon a hidden foundation of fear, surveillance, and ruthless pragmatism. It was a system designed to make the messy business of controlling human behavior appear as smooth, predictable, and reliable as the ticking of a clock. The state's desire for control, for a society that ran with the precision of a machine, wasn't just limited to monitoring its people's words and actions, it extended to the most abstract and fundamental force in their lives, time itself. In a temple courtyard, away from the clamour of the market and the palace intrigue, you find another of the era's ingenious inventions. It sits on a simple wooden stand, gleaming in a shaft of sunlight. It is a large, hemispherical copper bowl, floating in a bigger vessel of clear water. It looks like a piece of sacred art, polished to a soft glow. You lean closer and see its secret, a tiny, perfectly drilled hole in its base. As you watch, mesmerized, a small, steady stream of water seeps in. The bowl sinks lower and lower in the water, imperceptibly, silently. This is the Attica yantra, the water clock. This is the glamorous illusion. Here is a device of simple, elegant genius. In an age before mechanical gears and pendulums, the Gupta had mastered the art of measuring the passing hours with relentless accuracy. Unlike a sundial, it works on cloudy days and through the blackest night. It is a testament to their scientific mindset, their understanding of physics, their ability to impose a rational, mathematical order on the fluid and chaotic passage of time. You can imagine the quiet monk whose sole duty is to watch this bowl, to mark the moment it finally, gently, touches the bottom of the vessel. It feels like a meditative, peaceful practice, the marking of a day in serene, predictable increments. It's a beautiful object, a symbol of a civilization in quiet command of its world. But then, the moment comes. The lip of the copper bowl disappears beneath the surface of the water with a soft, final gurgle. The monk does not simply make a quiet note in a ledger. He stands, takes up a heavy wooden mallet, and strikes a massive bronze bell hanging beside him. The sound shatters the peace of the temple courtyard. It is not a gentle chime. It is a deep, resonant, commanding gong that rolls out over the temple walls, across the rooftops of the city, and into the surrounding fields. An hour, a muhurta, has passed. And that sound is not a piece of information for your personal convenience. You can't just glance at it and think, oh, it's about 3 o'clock, I should probably finish my shopping. This is the shocking reality. The temple clock was not a public service. It was a tool of mass control. That gong was an order. For the priests in the temple, it was the signal to begin a specific, astrologically mandated ritual. For the merchants in the bazaar, it could be the signal that the auspicious time for trade has ended. For a general planning a military campaign, it might be the only moment in the day deemed lucky enough to begin a march. For a farmer, an astrologer might have told him that he must plant his seeds only within the 4th muhurta of the day for the harvest to be successful. The clock dictated the rhythm of life for everyone, from the king to the peasant. Your personal schedule, your sense of fatigue, your own plans, they were all secondary to the cosmic timetable that this simple copper bowl was measuring. Time was not a personal resource to be managed. It was a divine, often dangerous, current that society had to navigate collectively, and the water clock was its captain. The precision you admired was not for the sake of individual freedom, but for the sake of collective obligation. It was the pacemaker of a society wired for ritual, not for personal ambition. So why would a society submit to such a rigid, top-down regulation of their day? Why didn't they want the freedom to manage their own time? The answer is that they had a completely different understanding of what time was. In their worldview, time was not a neutral, linear progression of identical seconds and minutes, like it is for us. Time was qualitative. It had texture, color, and temperament. Certain moments were charged with positive energy, blessed by the alignment of the planets, and were called muhurtas. These were the moments to marry, to start a journey, to sign a treaty. Other moments were unlucky, filled with negative influences, times when one should remain quiet and attempt nothing of importance. To act at the wrong time was to court disaster, not just for oneself, but for the entire community. The water clock was therefore a vital piece of religious technology. Its function was to ensure that the entire kingdom, or at least its most important functions, operated in sync with this cosmic rhythm. It aligned the actions of man with the perceived will of the gods. The king's primary duty, his dharma, was to maintain this harmony. A kingdom where rituals were performed at the correct time was a kingdom that would be blessed with prosperity, good harvests, and victory in battle. The water clock was not a cage, it was a shield, protecting society from the chaos of acting out of sync with the universe. Personal freedom, as we understand it, was a small price to pay for cosmic order and security. This relentless control, this noise, this constant need to be in sync with the stinking, crowded, gong-resounding city was the reality for most, but for the very, very wealthy, there was an escape. They didn't just find a way to escape the smell, or the rules, or the time. They found a way to escape the land itself. After the oppressive, time-bound reality of the city, let's seek an escape. Let's travel far north, to the stunning valley of Kashmir, a jewel in the crown of the later Gupta sphere of influence. Here on the placid, shimmering surface of Dal Lake, you see an almost dreamlike vision. Floating on the water are entire islands, lush with vibrant green gardens, blooming with flowers and heavy with ripening vegetables. Small, elegant wooden boats or shikaras glide silently between these verdant patches of land. Palaces and pleasure pavilions are built on the shore, their balconies reaching out over the water, designed to catch every cool breeze and to gaze upon this man-made paradise. This is the glamorous illusion of the floating gardens and lake palaces, a testament to a life of serene, aesthetic perfection. It is landscape architecture as high art, a harmonious blending of human ingenuity and natural beauty. It's a vision of a life of pure leisure, of drifting through a world of beauty, completely detached from the struggles of ordinary existence. Now, let's look beneath the beautiful surface of one of these floating islands. It's not a magical, solid piece of earth that happens to float. It is a dense, tangled, and somewhat smelly raft. To create these gardens, known as ras, local boatmen would first gather masses of lake weeds and reeds. They would weave them together into a thick, buoyant mat, sometimes yards thick, and anchor it to the lake bed with long poles. Onto this floating foundation, they would then pile layers of mud, silt and animal manure dredged from the lake bottom. You see them now, men chest deep in the cool water, scooping up bucket after bucket of dark, odorous muck and slinging it onto the woven mat of weeds. It's heavy, wet, and dirty work. This is the shocking reality. The idyllic floating gardens were essentially giant, man-made compost heaps. The rich, fertile soil that produced such beautiful flowers and abundant vegetables was a carefully constructed mixture of decaying plant matter and nutrient-rich lake-bottom sludge, thick with fish waste and other organic debris. While a welcome breeze might carry the scent of blossoms from a distance, up close, the gardens themselves had a distinctly earthy, bog-like aroma. Furthermore, these floating paradises were not just for aesthetic pleasure. They were a highly practical, and sometimes desperate, solution to a pressing problem. The Valley of Kashmir, while beautiful, had limited arable land. The floating gardens were a brilliant agricultural invention, a way to create new farmland where none existed. For the poor boatmen who lived on and around the lake, these gardens were not pleasure islands, they were floating farms, their primary source of food and income. The tomatoes, cucumbers and melons grown on these mats supplied the markets of the capital, Srinagar. The beautiful illusion enjoyed by the king in his lakeside palace was sustained by the muddy, back-breaking labour of an entire community of lake dwellers whose lives were bound to these soggy, slowly decomposing rafts. So what was the logic that created this stark division? Where one man's farm is another man's beautiful view. It's a story of both environmental adaptation and social stratification. The invention of the floating garden was a brilliant response to the unique geography of Kashmir. The lake-dwelling community, the Hanjis, developed this technique over generations as a way to survive and thrive in their aquatic environment. They were masters of the lake, their lives completely intertwined with its rhythms. The ruling class, whether they were local Kashmiri kings or governors appointed by the Gupta emperors, saw this existing local practice and co-opted it for their own pleasure. They had the wealth and power to commission larger, more elaborate versions, not for growing vegetables, but for cultivating ornamental flowers and building pleasure pavilions. The floating garden became a status symbol, a way to display one's wealth and aesthetic sensibility. For the elite, escaping to the lake was a way to get away from the crowded, dusty and periodically disease-prone cities. The cool breezes off the water were a natural form of air conditioning in the summer heat. The physical separation of the lake created a bubble of tranquility and exclusivity. The king could look out from his marble balcony and see a perfect, beautiful landscape, without ever having to engage with the muddy reality of its construction or the lives of the people who worked it. The very water that provided his escape also served as a moat, keeping the messiness of labour and poverty at a comfortable distance. The lake allowed for a perfect separation of the pristine product from its gritty process. This same dynamic admiring a perfect surface while ignoring the humble reality of what it's made of was at play in an even more common household object. From the grand, floating gardens, let's zoom into a much smaller, more intimate object, something you could hold in the palm of your hand. We are in the workshop of a master potter. All around you are shelves lined with finished wares, evidence of incredible skill and artistry. You see fine, elegant vessels with a distinctive, glossy red slip, so smooth and shiny they almost look like polished stone. There are water jugs designed to be porous enough to cool the water through evaporation, and storage jars coated with a glaze that makes them waterproof. The pottery of the Gupta era is known for its high quality, its standardized forms, and its simple, elegant beauty. This is the glamorous illusion, a craft that has reached a state of perfection. The potter is an artist, a respected artisan producing objects of utility and grace for a prosperous society. The beautiful, uniform pottery suggests a comfortable, well-fed population, a world of tidy kitchens and plentiful food. Now, let's step outside the potter's workshop and walk to the edge of the village. Here, you see a deep pit in the ground, the village midden heap. It's where everyone throws their trash. Over the centuries, it has become a layered archive of daily life. An archaeologist of the future is carefully excavating this pit, and what they find tells a different story. They find countless broken shards of that same beautiful, high-quality pottery you just admired. The pottery itself is a sign of prosperity, yes, but the archaeologist is looking inside the shards. They are analyzing the residue left on the pottery, scraping off microscopic food traces to be studied in a lab. They are also sifting through the animal bones and charred plant remains discarded along with the broken pots. This is the shocking reality. The analysis of these discarded remnants paints a picture not of universal prosperity, but of a stark dietary divide. The shards from the wealthier parts of town might have residue of ghee, milk, and perhaps even traces of expensive spices. The animal bones discarded alongside them might include those of goats, sheep, and game animals, but the shards from the poorer quarters, and the vast majority of the shards in the village heap, tell a much plainer story. The residue is overwhelmingly from simple grains like barley and wheat, cooked into a basic porridge or flatbread. The bones are few, and mostly from chickens or fish. For the vast majority of the population, the diet was monotonous and consisted almost entirely of carbohydrates. Meat was a rare luxury. The beautiful, standardized pottery, which seemed to suggest a shared standard of living, in fact held two very different realities. For the rich, it was a vessel for a varied and nutritious diet. For the poor, it was a vessel for the same subsistence-level grain, day after day after day. The perfection of the pot was the same for everyone. What went inside it was not. So why do we see this uniformity in the pottery itself, but such a dramatic difference in its use? The logic lies in the economics of craft production and distribution during the Gupta period. Pottery making had become a highly organized and specialized industry. Potters used fast wheels to mass-produce standardized shapes and sizes, which was far more efficient than making unique, one-off pieces. This made pottery affordable and accessible to almost everyone. A poor farmer could own a pot that was just as well made as a merchant's. This is the golden age aspect of it. A high level of craftsmanship became the norm, available to all. However, the food that went into the pots was subject to a completely different economic system, one based on land ownership and the agricultural surplus. The wealthy landowner or high-caste Brahmin took a significant portion of the harvest as rent or tribute. They had the surplus wealth to buy more luxurious food dairy products, sugar, more expensive grains like rice and meat. The peasant farmer, after giving up a large share of his crop, was left with just enough of the most basic grains to feed his family. He had the nice pot, but only a meagre porridge to cook in it. The pottery shards become a powerful symbol of the Gupta economy, a society capable of mass-producing high-quality goods, but one where the distribution of basic resources remained deeply unequal. The polished red surface of the pot, available to all, created an illusion of shared prosperity that masked the fundamental inequality of the food system. The empire's rulers were masters of crafting just this kind of illusion, not just with clay, but with words themselves. From the humble pottery shard that speaks silent truths, let us turn to the most articulate and celebrated voice of the Gupta age. We enter the royal court, a space of ultimate refinement. The air is cool, perfumed with incense. The king is on his throne, surrounded by his ministers and nobles, all adorned in silks and jewels. A man steps forward. He is Kalidasa, the greatest poet and playwright of his time, the Shakespeare of India. He begins to recite from his latest masterpiece, perhaps the famous play Shakuntala, or the lyrical poem Meghdadu the Cloud Messenger. His voice is resonant, his Sanskrit perfect, the language itself a complex and beautiful instrument. He speaks of star-crossed lovers, of nature's breathtaking beauty, of noble kings and virtuous heroines. The world he creates is an idealized, romantic vision of life, full of grace, dharma and profound emotional depth. This is the glamorous illusion. The poetry of Kalidasa and other court poets represents the pinnacle of Gupta culture. It is art for art's sake, a testament to a civilization that had the peace, prosperity, and sophistication to produce literary works of such timeless beauty. The poetry seems to float above the mundane world, inhabiting a purer, more noble realm of human experience. It is the very soul of the golden age, a voice that speaks of harmony, justice, and love. But now, let's pull back and look at the context in which this beautiful poetry is being created and performed. Kalidasa is not an independent artist writing in a secluded garret. He is a court poet. His livelihood, his status, and possibly his very life depend on the favour of his patron, the king likely Chandragupta Se. The king is not just a passive connoisseur of the arts, he is a political operator. He is funding this art for a specific purpose. And as you listen to the verses again, you start to notice a recurring theme. The kings in Kalidasa's plays are always depicted as flawless heroes, impossibly brave, wise, just and compassionate. They are the perfect rulers, beloved by their people, and blessed by the gods. The kingdom they rule is always a land of perfect order and happiness. This is the shocking reality. The sublime poetry of the court was, in many ways, sophisticated propaganda. It was an essential part of the king's public relations strategy. While the SPI network was managing the reality of dissent and corruption on the ground, the court poet was busy, crafting an official, idealized image of the state. The plays and poems were not just entertainment, they were commercials for the king's brand. By sponsoring works that depicted a perfect, harmonious kingdom under a perfect, virtuous ruler, the king was projecting an image of his own reign. He was telling his nobles, his rivals, and any visiting dignitaries that his own rule was just as glorious and divinely sanctioned as that of the heroes in the poems. The art was a mirror, but it was a funhouse mirror, designed to reflect back a perfected, flawless version of the patron. The beauty of the poetry was so dazzling that it made the idealized message almost impossible to question. To criticize the king would be to criticize the noble hero of the play, a figure everyone had just been brought to tears by. So why was this relationship of patronage and propaganda the dominant model for artistic creation? The logic is rooted in the very concept of kingship. In the Indian tradition, the king was not just a political leader, he was a semi-divine figure, the upholder of the cosmic order, Dharma on earth. Part of his royal duty, his Raja Dharma, was to be a patron of the arts and sciences. This was a sign of a successful and legitimate reign. The king who supported poets, astronomers and architects was demonstrating his own piety, refinement and prosperity. But this patronage was never a blank check. The artists were expected to, in turn, glorify their patron. It was a symbiotic relationship. The poet gave the king cultural legitimacy and a powerful propaganda tool. The king gave the poet wealth, status and the freedom to create his art within certain unspoken boundaries. Kalidasa was a genius, there is no doubt. But he was a genius working within a system. His work had to align with the political needs of the court. He was not writing a critique of power, he was composing a hymn to it. The golden age of literature was golden in part because it was paid for with royal gold, and its purpose was to make the source of that gold seem as luminous and pure as the poetry itself. This skill at creating a perfect image, a flawless map of reality, wasn't just for politics and art. It was essential for navigating the world itself. From the carefully crafted world of courtly poetry, let's venture out onto the vast, unpredictable expanse of the Indian Ocean. We are on the deck of a Gupta-era trading ship, a sturdy vessel with a single large, triangular sail. The ship is laden with the treasures of India, bolts of fine cotton, chests of spices, ivory and precious stones. The captain stands at the stern, his eyes on the horizon, his hand on the steering oar. He is a master of the sea, part of a long tradition of Indian sailors who have mastered the rhythms of the ocean. He navigates by the sun during the day and the stars at night, using ancient knowledge of celestial patterns to guide his vessel across the open water. This is the glamorous illusion. The Gupta sailor is a heroic adventurer, a proto-scientist confidently charting his course by the eternal, unchanging map of the heavens. He seems to be in complete control, a master of his destiny on the high seas. But as night falls, a thick bank of clouds rolls in, obscuring the stars. The wind whips the sea into a frenzy. The familiar celestial map is gone. The ship is now a tiny, fragile speck tossed about on a black, churning chaos. The captain's knowledge of the stars is useless. Panic begins to creep among the crew. They are lost, sailing blind in a hostile world. This is when you see the captain's true navigational system at work. He is not just looking at the sky. He is feeling the wind. He is tasting the salt in the air. He is watching the flight patterns of seabirds that appear at dawn. Most importantly, he has an almost mystical understanding of the seasonal monsoon winds, the great engine that powered this entire trade network. This is the shocking reality. Celestial navigation was only one part of a much more messy, intuitive, and often terrifying system. The true genius of these sailors was their mastery of the monsoons. They knew that for one half of the year, the winds blew reliably from the southwest, and for the other half, they blew from the northeast. This knowledge allowed them to sail from India to Africa and the Arabian Peninsula and then get blown safely home again months later. But this was a big picture strategy. On a day-to-day basis, navigation was a visceral, seat-of-the-pants affair. Furthermore, the dangers were not just from the weather. The sea lanes were not policed. They were infested with pirates. A vessel appearing on the horizon could be a fellow merchant or a ruthless band of sea raiders who would seize the ship, murder the crew, and steal the cargo. Every voyage was a high-stakes gamble. The serene image of the scientific navigator is shattered by the reality of a man wrestling with the raw, unpredictable forces of nature and the constant threat of human violence. He was less like an astronomer and more like a gambler, betting his life and his cargo on his deep, intuitive feel for the ocean's moods and a healthy dose of luck. So why was this risky, semi-intuitive method the backbone of one of the world's most lucrative trade routes? The logic is that they had perfected a system that worked just well enough. They combined empirical observation with accumulated tradition. They didn't have the magnetic compass yet, but they had the wind compass of the monsoons, which was arguably more important for long-range travel in the Indian Ocean. They created detailed mental maps based on generations of experience, noting the color of the water, the types of fish, the presence of specific sea snakes which indicated proximity to land. Their astronomical knowledge was also highly practical. They used instruments like the cross-staff or camel to measure the height of a star above the horizon, which could tell them their latitude, but this was a rough guide, not a precise GS coordinate. The system was a blend of science and sailor's lore. They put their faith not in a single, infallible technology, but in a holistic understanding of their environment. The threat of piracy was simply accepted as a cost of doing business, a natural danger of the sea like a storm or a reef. Ships often travelled in convoys for protection, turning the sea lanes into a cat-and-mouse game between merchants and predators. The glamorous idea of a lone, heroic sailor is replaced by a more realistic picture, a cautious, pragmatic captain relying on a complex web of environmental clues, collective wisdom, and communal security to survive. He was managing risk, not eliminating it. And this idea of managing risk, of creating a system that appeared stable and reliable on the surface, was the ultimate goal of the Empire's most fundamental tool of control. The captain and his crew, managing the immense risks of the open ocean, were all in pursuit of one thing: profit. And that profit was not measured in barter or trade goods back home, but in the ultimate symbol of value, the Empire's most perfect and potent invention. Let's leave the churning sea and step into the quiet of a treasury, or perhaps just the pouch of a successful merchant. In the palm of your hand, you now hold the culmination of all this effort, the engine of the entire empire, a single Gupta gold coin, a dinara. It is heavy, heavier than you expect, and it shines with the soft, warm glow of nearly pure gold. The metal has been refined to a remarkable standard of purity, a feat of metallurgy in itself. On one side, you see the image of a king, perhaps Samdragupta or his son, Chandragupta Seh. He is not just a static portrait. He is an idealized figure in motion. He might be depicted as a heroic archer, effortlessly drawing a massive bow. Or perhaps he is shown slaying a lion, a symbol of his power over the forces of chaos. On some of the most beautiful coins, he is shown seated, gracefully playing a veena, a stringed instrument, a testament to his refinement and patronage of the arts. The craftsmanship is exquisite, the details sharp, the Sanskrit script around the edge clear and elegant. This is the glamorous illusion in its most concentrated form. This coin is the golden age made tangible. It speaks of immense wealth, unwavering stability, artistic genius, and a powerful, confident civilization at its absolute zenith. It feels pure, trustworthy, and eternal. Now, clench your fist around that coin. Feel its cold, hard reality. This beautiful object is not a celebration of freedom and prosperity. It is one of the most effective tools of state control ever devised. Its beauty and purity are precisely what make it so powerful. Think of the peasant farmer, whose diet of simple porridge we discovered from the pottery shards. He lives largely in a barter economy. But once a year, the king's tax collector arrives. The tax is not payable in grain or chickens. It is demanded in the king's own gold or silver dinars. This is the shocking reality. To get that coin, the farmer must take his small surplus of grain to the market and sell it. He is now forced to participate in the state-controlled monetized economy, whether he wants to or not. He has to trade his real, tangible goods for this abstract symbol of value. The standardized purity you admire is what makes this system so brutally efficient. There is no arguing about the value of the coin. Its weight and purity are guaranteed by the king himself. This system transformed the entire economic landscape, forcing self-sufficient farmers and artisans into a cash-based system where the state held all the power. The coin is also a piece of pocket-sized propaganda. Every time a person uses it, they are holding the king's idealized image in their hand. They are reminded that their ruler is not just a man, but a mighty warrior, a divine protector, a patron of the arts. The coin circulates the court poet's perfect image of the king to the farthest corners of the empire, reinforcing the state's authority with every single transaction. It is a constant, subliminal message of power, a loyalty test that passes from hand to hand. The gleam of the gold is the gleam of a perfectly polished and inescapable system of control. So why was this system not seen as oppressive, but as the very definition of a golden age? The logic lies in the trade-off between freedom and stability. Before the rise of a strong, centralized state like the Guptas, long-distance trade was a chaotic and risky business. Merchants had to deal with hundreds of different local authorities, a bewildering variety of currencies with no standard value, and constant threats from bandits and pirates. A strong king who could mint a reliable, pure gold coin that was accepted everywhere and who could use the tax revenue generated by that system to build roads and provide some measure of security along trade routes was a welcome development for the commercial classes. The coin's guaranteed purity created a vast, unified economic zone. It was the ultimate risk management tool, reducing the uncertainty and fraud that had plagued commerce for centuries. This very stability, built on a foundation of state control and coercion, is what allowed for the immense accumulation of wealth that funded the temples, the universities, the poetry, and the science we live. The purity of the coin was a promise from the state: submit to our system, use our money, pay our taxes, and we will provide a stable framework in which you can prosper. The coin, then, is the perfect emblem for the entire Gupta enterprise. It is a beautiful, flawless object that creates order and prosperity, but it does so by masking a hidden system of compulsion and control that reaches into the life of every single subject. It is the golden, gleaming surface on a deep and complex reality.